Welcome to another episode of the Caribbean Edge. Tonight, I have the honor of having some amazing and beautiful guests with me. Miss Lovern Gordon from Love Life Now Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I have Rob Demeo joining us as well to share his personal journey with us. And in the somewhat dark, we have Antonia Arrendel. So if you're wondering why Antonia is dark, but we can see you a little bit, so that's amazing. He just had a power outage. And so he was still able to join us. And I know he may have to leave us a little early tonight. So we're going to dive in and have some conversations as all three guests are going to share with us their experience, what they've learned through domestic violence, what they would like to see change, and how they're personally impacting change, because domestic violence impacts all of us. It doesn't matter our race, it doesn't matter our financial status, and it is impacting our young people, especially our young girls. And I'm so honored, especially to have men who are willing to come and have this conversation on the Caribbean Edge tonight. So my name is Dawn Wilson. I'm going to have our guests just introduce themselves and let you know a little bit about them. So let's start with Antonio.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for having me, Dawn. My name is Antonio Arrendel. I'm from Boston, Mass. However, I spent some time in Haiti, in the island of Haiti, where my parents are from. Because they thought it would be better for me to have a basic education where I would know how to respect people, well-mannered, that kind of stuff. So they sent me to Haiti. And one of the things that happened when I was in Haiti, I was exposed to a lot of violence. And I didn't know what it was, but I thought it was just a lifestyle. Everybody just beat people up when you don't know how to study, when you don't memorize your lesson, or you're walking barefooted, or you look an adult a certain way. You were smacked, beat, thrown things at, whatever it was. So it was a way of life, to a point where I talk about my cousins who use abuse to try to teach me how to learn. That's what they taught me. And my grandmother, who was very appreciative of them helping her to raise me, when they were beating me, I would go back to her and say, dude, they are beating me, not just try to teach me, or what's the word? Discipline, yeah. And my grandmother would say, well, they love you. They just want you to do your best, without knowing the level of abuse I was going through. Fast forward, I came back to the U.S. and out of opportunity to go to high school in Milton, Mass, where I was recruited to college at Northeastern University on a track scholarship in football. And I excelled pretty well, almost went to the 1988 Olympics. That's how old I am. But that opened so many doors to athletic. That was my escape from a lot of pain, a lot of the nightmares that I had. I just do sports. And it's a way I denied myself of a lot of stuff. And through there, I got introduced to Sports Society, where I was educated on the level of men's violence against women. The word domestic violence that we use a lot, pretty much take away the responsibility on men, like you mentioned earlier today. So we call it exactly what it is: men's violence against women. Not saying that it doesn't have this other type of violence, but we'll focus a lot more on the behaviors of men towards women. And ever since 1994, my eyes open, and I can't shut them right now, to the point where I got candles on right now, because it's been going on for a long time, where I gotta do this talk. I wanna do this talk. At the same time, it hurts. When I heard the other day, Jonathan Price, God bless his soul, who was shot 2 days ago in Texas, because he intervened in a domestic violence situation at a what's the thing called, like at a gas station. The police tased him, then after that they shot him, without knowing that he was trying to be a pro-social bystander, which is something I preach a lot. So that part right there hurts a lot, because it challenges me now. What do I do? Do I continue to tell people to step in and do something? Or do I develop new skills on how to intervene and challenge the status quo of, if you say something or do something, and in our society, unfortunately, they call you a snitch. And I don't care right now. I need a lot more men to be snitches when they see something like that happening. So that's my short right now, but we'll dive into it later on.
Yeah, because I definitely want to get into what you went through as a young man. I know you highlighted a little bit about it, the island beatings and, you know, what's considered the norm in a lot of households. And it's really not the norm. And I've spoken out about domestic violence myself as well, being a child of a father that was very abusive to his women and abusive to his children as well. And so in my own personal life, I broke that cycle with my kids. And so I know it is possible for you not to repeat the behavior. It's certainly a choice that we all have to make despite what we've come through. So thank you for that. And thanks for standing up for what you believe in and for making a difference, because in the long run, our children will be impacted by this in the next generation. So thank you, Antonio. Lovern, tell us about your experience with domestic violence.
Sure. So essentially I as well, I come from the Caribbean. My name's Lovern Gordon. I'm the founder of Love Life Now Foundation, that we focus on promoting awareness on the issue year round as much as possible. And we do that because of my own experience. So I grew up in Trinidad till I was 15. And like Antonio, the beatings, you know, we witnessed they were completely normal, completely accepted as a way of discipline. And so my father was no exception. He sort of ran the household with an iron fist. And his idea of parenting was making sure that we had clothes on our backs to go to school, not necessarily at home, but making sure we had clothes to go to school, books in our bags, and that's primarily it, and making sure that we had good manners, right? And so for his girls, he wanted to make sure that we would not come home pregnant, and he ruled with an iron fist to that degree. And for his boys, he wanted to make sure that they obeyed his rules and didn't misbehave. And to that end, if we ever stepped out of line for any God-given reason, so if the girls were caught talking to a boy, or somebody reported something back to him, they or we suffered the brunt of the sort of the abuse, child abuse. As far as my mom, she is the one that really suffered at the hands of him, in terms of beatings every other day. He had an insane jealous streak. And so he would beat her to the point where he was using machetes on her. He was using beer bottles that he would break and stab her with. So when I see a stag bear, right, if you know the drink stag or a Carib beer, right, I associate that with beatings that my mother received. I associate machete with attacks that she received. So kick her in front of our house, beat her at the side of our house, beat her inside the house, to the point where she was sometimes running barefoot to escape. This was our complete normal growing up. Until I was 15, my grandparents asked if I could migrate to the States to come and finish high school. They saw some potential in me to do well. And I did just that. He let me migrate when I was 15 to the States, lived with my grandparents, finished high school here, had to go back to Trinidad to then sort of get my permanent residency at the time situated. And essentially, once I went back, I'm now 18. My older siblings are much older, and my younger siblings are now of age, I think, 16 and 12 at the time. And I'm right in the middle of 5 children. And we all were not standing for our father to put his hands on her. We had said to him succinctly, look, you can say what you'd like to her. Obviously, we didn't understand that there was emotional abuse, and that what he was saying to her was verbal abuse, all encompassed in domestic violence. And we didn't even know the term domestic violence, but we knew that we could at least protect her from the physical attacks, right? And so we said, you say what you want, but don't put your hands on her. And I think over the next 2 years, he realized that his power and control was diminishing over her because she had us as protectors. And so by the time 1998 rolled around, he decided that he would let her go, in part because he wanted to move on with another woman, but also because, as I said, he realized that he could not power and reign over her the way he did before. So I migrated back to the States. My mother and my 2 youngest brothers came with me. We lived with our grandparents in Dorchester. And essentially, I started going to school at nights, college. and a corporate America job as an entry-level secretary, and worked for a company during the day. And I thought I had it going on, right? I'm making my own money, I'm going to school at nights, and I'm doing the darn thing. I met this man that worked at the same company that I did, that kept trying to get my attention, and I finally gave in. We started dating, and about 3 months in, everything was great. He was taking me on these lavish dates. Now he was 10 years my senior. And for a lot of intent purposes, he sort of reminded me of my dad. And I didn't understand the dynamic of that till later on. Charming, well-read. My father also was well-read, charismatic. He spoke articulately, and so did this guy. And so taking me on these lavish dates, flowers, things that I had never experienced in a relationship before, coupled with a huge amount of attention. And so we're going out, and in about 3 months, things are great. And one day I called into the office saying that I don't feel well. I started suffering from allergies, which I still do today. And I said, you know, I think I'm coming down with a cold. I didn't know what it was at the time. And so I called the office and said, I'm not coming in. And he said to me, they said to me, okay, no problem. We'll see you tomorrow. About 10 minutes later, he calls my phone and he asks, why aren't you at work? And I said, you know, I think I'm coming down with a cold. Do you want to come bring me some chicken soup? And he said, chicken soup. And he hung up the phone very quickly in my ear, so loud. 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, he's at my house. Everybody's at work. I'm the only one at the house on the first floor. He barges in the room where I occupied, and starts rummaging through my things, looking under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtain, very paranoid, jealous behavior. And he says, comes over me, and he was a light-skinned guy, right? So I could see how red he was in the face, and this was completely Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde at this point. So I said, what is wrong with you? I said, you're scaring me. I said, nobody's been here. He didn't believe me, and he came over me, stood as I sat at the edge of the bed, and said, I knew you were too good to be true, and slapped me so hard I saw stars, Dawn. And then stormed out, left me there crying, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what just happened? What did I do to warrant this behavior? And I'm questioning myself, and I'm saying, maybe I should have called him. You know, we typically talk a lot during the mornings before I even get to my desk. I missed that red flag, because it was really him trying to check up on me to make sure I said where I said I was going to be at any given point. And so I said, you know what? Nope, I didn't do anything, and I am through. We don't have any kids. We're not, you know, we're not married. I'm over and done with. And so I went to New York that particular weekend. Spent the entire weekend in New York, had a great time, tried to forget about him. And that Sunday when I came back, my brother met me at the door and said, you're pretty popular around here. I said, why? And he said, such and such has been looking for you. And he said he dropped something off for you. I went into the room, and there were 24 purple roses. He knew that was my favorite color, even way back then. And he wrote a card. There was a card with it that said, I miss you, I love you, I'm sorry, please call me. And for a lot of times people ask, how do people fall into these types of relationships? And that's how easy it was, because in that moment I diminished what had happened to me, that slap, the behavior, all of it, and tried to sort of bring it back to what my mother had went through, and say to myself, you know what, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. It was just a slap. Look at the lengths he went through to apologize, because on top of the flowers, he also left a slew of messages that I just now was hearing at that particular moment, because I had turned off my phone all weekend. And so I accepted that apology, and that turned into almost 2 years of abuse, repeating, escalating, until the last night he beat me, which at that point, I was now living in a studio apartment directly next to a train station. And so he came in and walked in the door, and I knew that something was going to happen because of his demeanor. And he started asking me again, these very paranoid questions. Who's been here? I want to figure out, you know, who you're seeing on the side, because it can't just be me. And so I'm now trying to reassure him, everything's okay. I love you. You're the only one. And completely isolated from friends and family. So it's just me and him for the most part. And so that night, he again is not taking no for an answer, and he's rummaging through a lot of things. He comes upon these stack of books, and out pops this picture from this particular book, which had moved with me throughout the time I'd been back in the States. And he took the picture up, he looked at me, he looked at the picture, and then he flung it at me, and then stormed off into the kitchen. And when I looked at the picture, Dawn, I died inside because I knew exactly what he was probably thinking. This was a picture of me and my then ex-boyfriend from Trinidad, who we had said, look, we're going to have a long distance relationship when you come to the States. Clearly that does not, it didn't work for me at least. So don't do the long distance thing if you don't have to. Because about a week later or 2 weeks, he was cheating on me, okay? So that picture of us, I used as a bookmark in a particular book called Waiting to Exhale by Terry McMillan. And so, right?
Wow,
And so the book, this had moved with me like maybe at least 3 times and forgot about it. And so I looked at the picture and we were sitting on the beach, hugged up in the sand, looking very happy. And he came back into the room with a knife. And this was the first time that he had reached for a weapon. And he said, I'm going to kill you. And I believed him because at that point, I didn't have contact with my mom or my 2 younger brothers. It became too much to try to explain to them. I knew that they knew something was off about the relationship. They did not like him because they saw from the outside looking in that things weren't great. But I never dare tell them what the extent of the abuse was up until that point. Because I felt like they would have said to me, you're smarter than this. You should know better based on what our mother went through. Or my mom would say to me, you knew what I went through. Why would you let yourself go through this? And this was what I had in my head. And so I never told them. And so friends, don't talk to them on the phone at this point because he's always questioning who I'm talking to. Why am I talking to them that long? Are you talking about me? You know she doesn't like me. So why are you talking to her this long? So that type of attitude just kept me sort of in my corner and directly dealing with him.
So I have a question for you, Lovern. Because why didn't you want to hear that from your family?
Oh my gosh, the absolute shame. I was completely ashamed for the most part, and I completely did not want to get blamed for this thing, right? And because I'm thinking, I'm thinking that they are going to say I should know better. Right. And in my mind, in the back of my mind, I should know better. Right. I'm smart. I'm book smart. Like I should be together. I shouldn't be going through this. I shouldn't be to the level of where this relationship has now taken me at this point. I just shouldn't. And so that particular night, I believed him. I believed that if he slit my throat, he had this knife and he said that that's what he was going to do because I had made a fool of him up until that point. He said, you know, what are you having phone sex with this guy? What are you sending him money? What are you guys laughing at me? And I said, no. And the more I tried to appease him, the more irate he got. At that particular point, he gets on top of me, straddles me on my daybed, which is what I had in my bedroom. And he presses the knife up against my neck, enough to let me know, as I said, to slit my throat at any time. And he starts spitting on me. He starts slapping me. Now, up until the first attack that had happened way back when, he had never hit me in my face again up until that point. So I knew that this was like a bad situation right now. And so he started punching me about the body, spitting in my face, strangling me. Then he would stop at times, get up, pace the floor, come back, straddle me, press the knife up, spit in my face, yell profanities. This started from like 9 o'clock the night before, and it went off and on till about 2 o'clock the next morning. So a complete night of torture. And then at about 2 o'clock that morning, he just laid down in my bed and went to sleep like nothing had happened. And so I laid down and I went to try to cry myself quietly to sleep. At about 4 o'clock that morning, I felt the sharpest pain that I had ever felt. It felt like a dagger trying to pierce through my skin. And so I'm saying to myself, okay, I don't know what bleeding internally feels like, and I do not know what a broken bone feels like, but something's happening here, and I need to make a choice whether or not I lay here and deal with it, or I get up and get myself help. I lived close to a hospital, Carney Hospital to be exact, and I said, I'm going to take myself to the hospital. So I got up, got dressed very quietly, limped down the stairs, and caught a cab. I lived directly next to the train station, so there were always cabs. Got in the cab, asked the driver to take me to the hospital. We got to probably maybe there's only 2 red lights, I think, in between my destination and the hospital. We got to the first red light, and my abuser pulled up next to the cab. He starts yelling. I guess he realized that I was gone, saw that I was getting the cab, and followed. And he's yelling out the car, get out the cab. I'm going to kill you. Get out the cab right now. And I'm telling the driver, I said, that's my ex-boyfriend. So for the very first time, I knew that I had gotten to my breaking point and I needed to leave this relationship. And I voiced that. I said, that's my ex-boyfriend. And if you let me out of this cab, he will kill me. He listened to me. I said, if you have to run the red light, run it. And he did. He ran the red light. This is 4 o'clock, 4 something in the morning. And when he sees the cab driving off, he starts drag racing the cab. When he sees that the cab takes a left into Kearney Hospital, he speeds off. Because I didn't realize back then that for the first time, he thought that I was going to say something. I was going to speak up. And I didn't. I got into that emergency room and the whole idea of shame and blame came over me again. And I ended up telling the ER nurses that I fell in the shower and that I had hit certain places where it really hurt. So they ran x-rays conducive to that. And then the ER doctor comes into the room maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours later. And he says to me, he pulls up on his chair, rolls over, and he says, who did this to you? And I immediately clammed up and he said, what? These x-rays aren't, or these injuries aren't consistent with you falling in the shower. So who did this to you? He said, I can get you help. And that to me meant the police getting involved. That to me meant my building finding out that I was going through this in my apartment. That to me that I could potentially get kicked out. That to me meant my school finding out. That meant they would understand why I was flunking in a lot of subjects, okay, at the time. That to me meant my job potentially finding out. The whole stigma around Black women and drama and bringing drama, right? I was one of 2 Black women in a predominantly white office, okay? And so the idea of them ever having any inclination why sometimes I would come back to my desk looking disheveled, even though I tried, if he would show up to my job randomly, accost me for the type of underwear I was wearing, accused me of trying to pick up a guy in the office because he called and I didn't pick up and it went to voicemail and just really crazy stuff. And I would have to go back, I'd have to go to the bathroom, clean myself up, make it look like nothing had happened. If they had an inclination, I thought that I would get fired. And so all of that came over me and I said, nope. I fell in the shower. Thankfully, it was hip contusions and upper torso contusions that I had, which bruised and swollen flesh is what I felt like was trying to pierce through my skin. And so it thankfully was treated with meds and ice. I went home, not understanding that that was the most dangerous time for me, right? Didn't understand any of that. Went home and for 2 weeks, nothing from him. It was quiet. And in that 2 weeks, I did not understand as well that he was waiting for some type of heat to show up. Police, brothers, friends, anybody that I now told about what had happened to me, and nobody did. So 2 weeks to the day, calls me and says, hey, I'm coming over. Like nothing had happened. And so I said, no, you're not. I said, the only person that I did tell was my building management and asked them to have my locks changed. I had to pay for it. But I was completely okay at the time doing that because I was so scared out of my mind. And so changed the locks. I said, you can't come here. The locks have been changed. He said, what? And so for the first time, he's hearing from me that I'm saying I'm done. And that sent him into a fury. He then showed up, waited for somebody to come outside, and he walked into the building. No problem. Ended up at my door. He's banging the door, demanding that I open it because he wants to talk to me. I am telling him on the other side, I'm not letting you in because you don't want to talk. He then started banging the door and he said, if you don't let me in, this is your last chance. Didn't do it. 5 minutes later, he's back at the door. And now I'm hearing some sort of scraping on the other side. And he's banging the door physically with his body. And I'm scared. So my whole body's up against the door. And I'm praying to God that I can just now finally decide to call the police. I reached for my landline. The landline was dead. My prepaid phone at the time didn't have any minutes on it, and he knew that I didn't go out to replenish my minutes till later on in that day, on Saturday afternoons. So I remembered somebody in passing saying that if you have no minutes, you can still dial emergency numbers. So I called 911, prayed that somebody would answer, and the next thing that I heard was, 911, what's the emergency? I started telling the dispatcher that somebody was trying to break into my apartment. So even though I am telling, I'm still not giving him up. Because again, in the Black community, there is this stigma around the Black man that you have to protect the Black man because essentially they have been accosted and they're being accosted by the system, and you don't want to be the responsible party for putting a Black man in jail. And so all of that is coming over me, right? And so somebody is trying to break into my apartment. Ma'am, you don't know who this person? No, I do not. Please send someone quick. He hears me talking. He says, you're bluffing. And as he hears me continuously talking, he realized that I was indeed talking to someone. The next knock I heard, because his banging on the door stopped, Boston police opened the door. When they opened the door, I think I must have jumped on that police officer's shoulder so much because I was so happy to see like real people, like not trying to bang down my door and kill me. And I said, I tried to call you from my landline, but it was dead. And they said, where's your phone lines? I said, it's in the basement. And I said, I heard like some scratching. He said, well, that will explain the wood chippings on the door because it looks like this person was using like a crowbar to get in between the locks. And the other detective came back and said that this person cut my phone lines in the basement. So he had every intention of getting into that room and making sure that I had no outside contact that particular night, that afternoon. And so I finally decided to file a restraining order. But even then, it took maybe another 4 days because then the stalking began. I'm sure he saw that the police showed up, and he never came at me physically again, per se, but he started leaving derogatory notes on my car. Anybody who F's Lovern is getting sloppy seconds because I had her first. I mean, those are the things that I would have to fish off my car first thing very early in the morning because I didn't want anybody seeing that stuff. And so I ended up getting a restraining order. Even that process it felt like re-victimization because I had to then sit and for the first time, explain to a judge why I needed this guy to stay away from me.
Lovern, so wow, a lot that you've been through and the legality part of it, I definitely want you to tell us what that was like as well. Rob, thank you so much for your patience. I do want to switch a little bit to Antonio because I know you have the light situation you're dealing with, and I know you have to click off probably by a quarter till. Okay, so
I'll try to hang on as long as I can.
Yeah, I know you will. And Lovern, I certainly want to get back to you because I want to go back to your childhood as well. And thank you for explaining all that. The viewers have checked in and everyone's saying hello and they're making some comments. So I just want to switch to Antonio because I know he also has a lot to share with us. I want you to take us, and Rob, thanks again for your patience as well. Antonio, thank you for joining us, especially with your power outage and your time commitments this evening. So tell us about child abuse in Haiti. I know you skipped over it a little bit, but you shared with me for the brief time we spoke what you went through. And I want you to explain the raw abuse you went through in Haiti and what that was like.
Well, the thing is, and like the abuse I talk about the physical abuse. And there's another part of it too that I think a lot of men don't talk about. And in Haiti, growing up, I had maids. Maids were servants, that made food, did the laundry and everything. And for whatever reason, a lot of men, and Haitian men will know what I'm talking about. The maids will sometimes, they live in the house. And when they live in the house, they're a little bit much older. The much older part I'm talking about, they would usually touch me the wrong way as well. All right. And as a boy, you're like, ooh, they touching me. I'm cool. I'm whatever. And as I get older, you realize I was a child and this is a grown semi-woman, touching you. And you don't talk about it. You think it's normal. And you can't tell nobody because no one's going to believe you. And if you were to talk about it, what's wrong with you? That's a cool thing. And so it's almost like you want to brag about it, but you don't want to talk about it. So the abuse eventually got me to a point where I stuttered a lot, wetting the bed. And when I went to bed, there was more physical abuse because that means you're lazy. That means you're a pig, you're whatever. And to a point, my whole neighborhood would refer to me as American pig / American. They call me American cochon. All the Haitian kids that's listening know what I'm talking about. So they call me that. And so the learning disabilities start happening. The behaviors of not running away, but there was a time where I tried to run away. And I maybe was 9 years old. And I remember going to a place called Lovern, which is like a famous beach. And there were like bands would play there and all that kind of stuff. I went there by myself at 9. That's like the distance from here. That's maybe a 5 miles travel. I went by foot, went over there, got into an inner tube. Back then, the tires of trucks had inner tubes. And the fishermen used to use those as boats to go fishing. And I got into one of those and I went dead in the center of the ocean. I paddled myself there, not knowing how to swim. And my idea was, I'm gonna find my way to quote unquote America, where I came from, because the abuse was like overwhelming. And I feel like sometimes I was being abused because they thought, since you're American, you got something, or you're smarter, I was judged very early on. So it wasn't just like my family abusing me. There were people in the neighborhood that abused me as well. And in the name of, I'm trying to help you become a better man, a better kid, behave better, stop talking like this, stop walking like this. It's like everything I did was wrong, was very, very critical. So I was afraid to do a lot of stuff. The only thing that really helped me was, I think, like I said, sports and music. I picked up playing soccer, and that was my way of getting out. And if my grades were bad, I couldn't go play. So it's like everybody turns pretty much. Just find reason to slap me, beat me, to a point where I remember my cousins, we had this frame beds, and it was like metal frames, like they have in jails or group homes, whatever, and they had the little thin mattresses, and they would put me in between the frame and the mattress and fall asleep like I'm not there. So I would wake up the next day with the frame, the wires all into my skin with blood and everything. I couldn't turn. My face was face down so I can breathe. Yeah, it was that type of piece. And I think I'm still today, you know, I have my every now and then I get my nightmares, especially when it comes to allergy season. My nose I can't breathe. So that brings back all that in the middle of the night. And unfortunately, the people that, you know, I've dated or that slept in the same room as I slept, whatever, they're like, oh, you all right? And I can't tell them that story. I just say, yeah, you know, regular nightmares or panic attack, whatever it is. But they always brought that back to me because that long-lasting abuse got me to a place where I made a choice that I'm not going to be like this to anybody else. To a point where I wanted to really, not suicide, but I didn't know how to swim. What am I going to do in the middle of the ocean? And it was a fisherman that found me that day and brought me back. And I went back home on my own, didn't tell nobody. Nobody knew anything. And I just started talking about this because after my daughter just passed not too long ago, and through therapy, all these things are coming up for me. And I continue to do the work that I do. I'm with Lovern in Love Life now. And when I hear her story that she's talking about right now, she talks about the judicial system. And I had a chance to work with batterers or men that were court ordered to attend classes for domestic violence or men's violence against women, rather. I started hearing their stories. I started hearing how they were brought up. I started hearing the idea of what it is to be a man in their head, why they took the cigarette and turned it off on their girlfriend's neck, why they took the curling iron and inserted in her private part. Oh, I just turned off my light, sorry, hold on. You know, why they did these things. I started to understand more and more. The more I listened, I realized I'm not by myself. A lot of these men, they have this idea of how to survive and how to protect themselves and how to protect, quote unquote, the F word, their feelings. And a woman shows they're confident and you're not sure of yourself. The only outlet that they think they have is to find a way to dim that woman's light. No pun intended. You know, they try to find a way to like, oh, wow, she's too confident. She knows what she's doing. She knows how to read. She's beautiful, whatever. And that's that trust I think Lovern is talking about, that man who's unsure of himself because of something. And again, those are not excuses. I'm big on accountability, you know, but you would like to find out those things. He's not the only one who has it. A lot of men are walking around with their three-piece suit, with their Harvard degrees and everything. I'm not picking on Harvard or anything, but they're all broken men. They're all broken men. So I always talk about prepare before you have to repair. So we have to prepare our boys right now, so we don't have to repair them as men like we're doing right now in these days. Because right now with COVID-19 going on, a lot of couples are stuck in the house, and we're finding out more and more the violence is rising up, the abuse to kids is rising up, the sexual assault is rising, but no one is paying attention to that because we have to ignore this kind of stuff because there's other stuff going on. We have to put our mask. Let's focus on our masks. Let's focus on other stuff. Let's focus on the NFL. Let's focus on a lot of stuff that are not relevant to what's going on in the home. Those kids, when they can't do their work on the laptop, the father and mother, they argue about that right now. Because now I'm home, I see what's going on. My son can't read. My daughter can't log on. So we're going to have it out later on when they're asleep. Guess what? They're not listening. Yes, they are. They are afraid. They're under the covers like this. But they didn't see nothing, but they have an imagination. They can imagine what's going on in that room when daddy's talking to mom or his mom's screaming. They're imagining these things. So we said they didn't see nothing, but they're hearing it and they have an imagination. So we can go so far away with this, but as far as I say, my dedication to this work since 1994, it's a lifestyle. I have to do it. I don't know anything else. I was able to save, quote unquote, save myself, and I want to find a way to help others. And I think Lovern created a platform, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, Lovern, to a point where I am able to speak about it proudly. And I challenge people. And when it's a mind your business, it's none of your business. When somebody is talking downstairs, they're fighting downstairs, it is my business to call the police to save somebody's life. Or you a snitch, guess what? Call me Mr. Snitch next time. You know? So
thank you.
It's a lot to this conversation, this opportunity. It's a lot. Yeah.
And once again, I can't thank you enough for joining us, Antonio, and making it happen in the darkness. For those that may have joined late, he has a power outage where he lives. And you mentioned, which I did not know, that you lost your daughter. So my heart goes out to you. I can't even begin to, just your strength as a man, just talking about everything that you've gone through, being in the Caribbean. We know, unfortunately, the beatings are there. The children, as Lovern mentioned as well, we observe this behavior. We see it. We know it's wrong. And so thank you for speaking out. And like you mentioned, Antonio, a very critical point for us too is during COVID-19, when people are at home with their abusers, both children and parents. And I think you wanted to say something, Antonio.
I was gonna say one more thing. I remember not too long ago, I was at a barbershop and I heard this man said, I'm gonna take her to Haiti on a vacation and I'm gonna teach her a lesson. Because he knows he cannot behave like, he cannot abuse her here, cannot yell, all that kind of stuff. He knew that he couldn't get away with it here, but he's gonna trick her to take her to Haiti to handle his business like he says. And I've known one of my friends' father did that to his wife. They went back to Montserrat and he murdered her. No, sorry, Guyana. Yep, went over there, he murdered her. And that was it.
It happens
so
more often than we
it's not
think.
people talk about, oh yeah. And we will use that language that, oh, he must have snapped. He did not snap. He calculated everything, but a ticket, but the flowers, but the I'm sorry's, the nice suits. You talk about the roses. So it prepared it and everything, and go ahead and follow with a plan. So that snapping stuff, I lost it. Those are excuses that amount to nothing in my book. No, I mean, yes, I am saying it. I'm not gonna say no disrespect. but with respect. No excuses.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Laverne.
there is no snapping. Too often you hear these stories on the news, and then I know Rob is going to speak to what happened to his dear mom, but there is no, oh, it just happened. You know, there's a buildup of this behavior that happens that takes them to this no excuse level. Murder, suicide, murder, harming the victim, you know, just suicide in itself. That didn't just happen. And so your neighbor, you know, who you thought your neighbors were, I know you saw something, I know you heard something. You can't just say that it was never like that. You have noticed behaviors that you chose to ignore as a bystander. I'll be quiet now because Rob has.
No problem. We don't want you to be quiet tonight. And you're looking at some great points, because the silence, and I can testify to that, growing up in a household with an abusive dad, everybody on my street knew what was going on and no one could do anything. I think they feared my dad. The laws weren't in place and there was no stopping him. You know, the only person that could stop him was himself, you know? So thank you again, everybody. And Rob, I'm gonna get back to all of you guys. Rob has been so patient. And if you are watching this right now, I ask you to hit share, because people need to hear this conversation tonight, because you will impact several people's lives by sharing this. So please hit share. Rob, my heart goes out to you. I know you lost your mom, and I want you to tell your journey in your own way. So I won't say any more, but thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I can sit here and listen to Lovern and Antonio speak all day. They've educated me tremendously on the growing issue of domestic violence. And the silence piece, you know, a lot would change in my life if neighbors had spoken up and, you know, talked about, you know, some of the things that were going on. So I come from Boston. I don't come from any cool Caribbean island or anything like that. I grew up right here in Boston. City kid. I came from a single family household with a mom who tried to do the best she could do to give me everything that I wanted, needed, and desired as a kid. Like, I couldn't understand why my mom didn't live with my dad for a long time. My father got custody, shared custody with my mom, and I went to his house on visits. It turns out my father was a raging alcoholic, and he'd like to beat on me when he would get drunk. My mom had to intervene on those weekly visits and put a stop to it. And I quickly understood that my father used to beat my mom before I could remember, and that's why my mom got away from him. So I was predisposed to domestic violence before I even knew it, and took the beatings from my father. My mother was a single mother. She lived on her own. She put me first before everything else. It made that was a very lonely lifestyle for her, and I didn't realize it at the time. Like Antonio talked about, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse too. I had a neighbor who, well, actually a landlord that my mother rented to, because she was a single mom and men took advantage of my mother, thought he could touch me in my pants as a kid and tell me not to tell my mother or we'd be homeless. So I went through that, and with all this trauma in my life, like, I gravitated towards substances that took me outside myself, when I got a heroin addiction very quick and very early on in my life. And you know, with that being said, years went on. I went through the whole substance abuse, in and out, struggling for years. My mom did the best that she could do. When I was 15 years old, like, just as amazing as Zoom's allowing us to interact with each other back then, when I was 15, America Online allowed strangers to come into your house. My mother met a man on America Online chat room, and they started chatting, and he started to make her feel really wonderful about herself in the midst of her son's you know, delinquency and substance abuse use and things like that. And he gave her the attention that, you know, she fiend for from, you know, anybody that was willing to just pay her that attention, because my mother never came first. She didn't know how to put anything but me first. And that, sure enough, that man came to live with us when I was 15. It was a clash of the titans type of situation where our personalities didn't get along very well. And I soon to realize that him too was a raging alcoholic. So I kind of got wrapped up in my substance abuse, and I chased my drug of choice for years, and I kind of left it to a very uneducated mind, kind of, you know, once a battered wife, always a battered wife. I don't care. All I care about is the next bag of heroin. And I took that and ran with that for a long time. But there was always this unique vibe, because I was so uneducated about domestic violence, as the way that man treated my mother. the language, the verbiage that he used when he spoke to my mother, the fear I could see in my mother's eyes when things weren't done the right way, when I would go to my mother's house pretty much to beg for money for more drugs. A lot of my violent crimes on my criminal record have resulted in the way the man spoke to my mom as a teenager. And, you know, at one point my disease of addiction got so bad, I just was off and running. My mother got sick and tired at some point of her son, you know, my substance abuse issues, that my mother decided she was going to move from Massachusetts to Florida. Now, his substance abuse, well, his alcoholism grew to a pretty rough shape. She ended up packing him up and sending him back home to where she found him on America Online, which was Arizona. It was, I forget the name of the town, right by Flagstaff, Arizona. So he went back there. He was able to put some sobriety time together and kind of work on himself just a little bit, not enough, but just a little bit, where, you know, he put that mask back on. And, you know, my mother had chased me around for years. At this point, she's in Florida dealing with my shenanigans in Boston. But my mother ended up having to undergo some back surgery where she asked me to come out and take care of her because there really wasn't anybody that could. And, you know, I couldn't leave my drug dealer long enough to be able to go out there and show up and be available for my mother. So I turned down the opportunity in the fear of leaving Boston and my drug dealer to go take care of my mother. But because this man put some sobriety together and basically showed my mother a little bit of action behind his words, she invited him out to take care of her through that back surgery, but she could never get him to leave. Sure enough, I got my life together. I found what I needed. I hit my bottom so hard I bounced twice. I got my substance abuse issues under control. I was able to give back to my community. I started to, you know, break my silence as an addict and raise my hand and share my hope, my strength, my inspiration, and allow others to follow in the example that I led, which led me into, you know, working in the substance abuse field. You know, at many different detox facilities here in Massachusetts. I started working and advocating on many different nonprofit organizations to kind of give back to people who suffered in silence like myself for so many years. As I did this, I built a new relationship with my mom with newfound respect for her and for myself. She really got to figure out who her son was. You know, I was clean today. I was able to show up for her. I was able to do things for her that I normally wouldn't or typically couldn't do when I was out there ripping and running through the streets of Boston. My mother and I developed an intimate relationship, and through all this time of me getting high, she never gave up on me. My mother was the type of person that could love me when I couldn't love myself, and she did the same for this man through his alcoholism. And, you know, I went out there for a week. My mother, she unlocked her doors and let me in her house. She didn't have to hide her purse. She didn't have to hide her debit cards. I was there able to go out and take my mom and take her and buy her some jewelry and do all these cool things because I'd started some businesses out here and I was financially stable for the first time ever. The pride my mother had with me was just, it was amazing. It was just an amazing relationship, nothing that we've ever had before. And, you know, it was right before Hurricane Irma was about to hit back in, I think, 2016. I was on my way out. I think I got out on the last flight before they shut down the airplanes and stuff like that. And I guess that was the night or shortly after him seeing the recovery and the self-worth that I had discovered of who I was and those insecurities, fears, and doubts that I lived with that kept me stuck, that he continuously fought on a daily basis. I don't know if there was jealousy or what the case may be, but he decided to pick up his drug of choice and relapse on alcohol. And this was something that wasn't told to me. My mother kept that secret from me. My mother kept secrets from my family if in the past 15 years before she sent him packing, if he ever put his hands on her. A lot of the truth didn't come out until the end of my story. And, you know, as this went on, the relapse started happening. I didn't know what was going on. My mother's not going to call her recovering drug addict son to come handle the situation because I wouldn't have handled it as gracefully as some of the others like Lovern or Antonio. It would have been a different situation and a different outcome. Impulsive and obsessiveness is part of my disease of addiction. You know, so this kind of went on. You know, I was about 2.5 years into my recovery journey, and on April 13th of 2018, I got this phone call from my uncle, and I decided not to pick up the phone. And I knew I wasn't picking up the phone because I knew what my uncle had to tell me. My uncle's a Catholic priest here in Massachusetts, and a Catholic priest don't call your phone at 9:30 at night other than to tell you someone had died. So I picked up the phone. My uncle proceeded to tell me that my mom had died. And when he proceeded to tell me how she died, my life changed on that very moment. Like, he told me that Barrett killed my mother. And it was something that I always knew was going to happen, but it was never something, it was always more of like a joke. He's going to kill her. You know what I mean? It wasn't anything like that I ever took seriously, but he did. This man decided to pick up his drug of choice that day, alcohol. It actually was his 50th birthday. April 13th is the man's birthday. He was turning 50 years old. I guess from, the evidence that was gathered, the man decided to have a little party for himself and drink as much as he could. My mom got up for work around 7 o'clock, and she went to work that day. She came back around noon to check on him, and she had a grocery list of, ingredients to make this man a birthday dinner. She sat down in this chair, and what it seemed to have happened is my mom saw how intoxicated he was, and she had basically told him, "That's it, I'm done, you're gone." He decided to pick up a barbell that was out on the foyer, the carport of her home, and he proceeded to cave my mother's head in with this barbell. And then after he was done, he didn't just hit her. He went in on her. There was a lot of rage, a lot of anger, a lot of just evil that came out of this man. He left my mother's head splattered on the ground. He put a blanket over my mom, and he proceeded to go to the local bar around the corner where the police had picked him up later. Now, my mom and her best friend worked together at the same nursing home, and they noticed that my mom didn't come back from lunch on time. So my mom's friend went back to the house to check on her, and when she came back, she found this gruesome, horrible scene. The police were alerted, and that's when they picked him up around the corner. He was brought into custody out in Bradenton, Florida, to the Bradenton police station. Some of his interview was recorded and can be found online. He was extremely, extremely intoxicated. And in my opinion, he woke up the next morning not realizing what he had done. That day changed my life. That day changed my life as a son, as a father, as a man, as a recovering addict. That day changed my life. For the next 18 months, my room turned into like a episode of Law and Order. There was a hamster wheel going on and on in my brain for 18 months of trying to figure out why this man did this. I was looking for rational in an unrational situation. I had to get involved in, outside resources. The Narcotics Anonymous, the recovery world wasn't enough. I had to seek, mental health professionals to help me get through the things that I was going through. It's one thing to lose our parents. It's another thing to have our parents taken from us at the hands of an individual that they invited into their home. And now here I am with, 14 months, just about to handle a capital murder, trial. Basically, he was indicted on first-degree capital murder out in Bradenton, Florida. It took about a year for the detectives and the Bradenton police to put together their investigation, and we went into court. And through this year, the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life is stay clean through this tragedy that my family endured. Even just talking about it, it still gets me. It still gets me because there were things that came out in the trial that, Lovern and Antonio spoke about, that the neighbors heard the fighting before the murder. The neighbors heard the fighting days before the murder took place. There's people that knew that Barrett was drinking, but nobody chose to say anything. I don't know about, and Antonio says it, if you see something, say something. Like, I'm going to say something when I see somebody I know struggles with alcohol drinking again. You know what I mean? I'm going to say something when I see someone being mistreated by a man or a female mistreating a man, because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And until they know, there's nothing that can be done. There was a lot of opportunity for someone to break the silence, speak up, and alert somebody as to what was going on in my mom's home. So somebody could have intervened, whether it be the law, whether it be me, whether it be a family member. There was a lot of signs that had happened, prior to my mom getting her head caved in that could have been, really avoided. So I went through this process of grief. As a recovering addict, I've never been through or gone through something so horrible in my life. But there were people, because of the advocacy work that I've done in the substance abuse field here in Massachusetts, I was brought, soldiers were brought into my life, angels, Lovern and Antonio and the Love Life Now Foundation, where they could sit me down, do some amazing things in honor of my mother. allow me to be my mother's voice and do what I do best and advocate. Throughout this time, I started to see there's a very, very close relationship with domestic violence and substance abuse. I was able to follow a path in my own professional career to try to help bridge that gap. And like to see that, like, you know what, I see that, you know, I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't drunk. You know what I mean? It's something that I hear constantly. And in the midst of COVID-19 now here, I mean, my mother's boyfriend, he's away for life. We got a life sentence in the courtroom. I was able to address my mother's killer. I think I was even held back and detained by a domestic violence advocate at one point and a bunch of bailiffs because I tried to attack my mother's boyfriend in court. You know, we went through the trial. There was a lot of rage, a lot of emotions. To hear the 911 calls, by the grace of God, I was a little late for the trial and didn't get to see the gruesome photographs, so I have to remember my mother in that way. But to have the support of Lovern and Antonio, the Love Life Now Foundation, the recovery community here in Massachusetts, it was a blessing to be able to walk into the courtroom and with the knowledge that these people had given me of domestic violence and see things for what they really are. And to understand that, like, hey, something could have been done. The silence could have been, someone could have spoken up and it could have avoided this outcome that my mom was faced with. My mom, I realized me and my mom had more in common than I ever thought we did. I suffered in silence about my drug addiction, too afraid to raise my hand and ask for help. Well, my mom lived with a monster in fear and in silence, too afraid to raise her hand and ask for help. You know, this had happened. We got the murder trial, and I started advocating again. I started to see some, you know, serious gaps with substance abuse and domestic violence. Now, I've been able to, I'm a community outreach coordinator for a national healthcare provider that offers detox services to recovering addicts and alcoholics that want to get clean. What I'm seeing is more cases of domestic violence coming in. I'm seeing women with black eyes and obvious signs of domestic violence. I'm seeing a lot, like Antonio talked about, a lot of people being forced to quarantine together, and a lot of unhealthy behaviors being, you know, kind of coming to light. It's been a hard road. There's been a lot of deep-rooted issues, a lot of trauma that I'm faced with even today that I have to work through. You know, today I have a slew of resources today to be able to combine both, to be able to identify and see and open my mouth when everybody else is too afraid to talk about it. And like, for me to be able to do that, you know, and be my mother's voice and do this after the tragedy that me and my family has endured has been a blessing that has helped make, you know, the healing process for me just a little bit easier. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, you know, and that's kind of, you know, the highlights of my story.
Wow, and thank you so much for your strength as a man, for speaking your truth. I mean, your mom's name is Joan, right?
Yes.
I did read the article, so if viewers want to know, I will share the article as well. And we can't thank you enough for shedding light on your mom's story, your personal story as well, because you're being very honest about your role in the entire journey as well. You know, the drug addiction, then finding yourself clean, and then your mom. You're touching on so many different subjects, the silence of the neighbors. And as I'm listening to that, I don't know, in my journey, I just know what people say. It's like, but she keeps going back, or, you know, what can I do? Even if I call the police and the police come, and the police come 3, 4, 5 different times, you know, so these conversations have to continue. We have to have them because it gives us the real perspective, right? The raw truth. Do you have children, Rob?
I do. Yes, I do.
Do you find strength through them as well?
Of course I do, yeah.
I see your face lighting up. I know that was very deep for you, so I wanted to dig and give you a smile.
It's unfortunate because my mother has she's about to be 4 years old that she never got the chance to meet. You know, that man didn't just take a mom from me, but she took a grandmother from her grandchildren. She took, you know, a sister from her brothers and sisters. She took so much. And I think one of the other biggest things I'm starting to see too is that a lot of women that are coming in the substance abuse and the addiction field are coming in self-medicating because of the trauma that they've endured because of their abuser. I'm finding a lot of women finding themselves through the doors of detox and, you know, substance abuse treatment because it started out as, you know, taking a little Xanax to kind of deal with the anxiety of their abuser before or after their beatings, or pain medications because, you know, she went to the emergency room for walking into a door and walked out with a prescription of, you know, Percocet. I'm starting to see a lot of abusers come through the door because they get that domestic violence charge and they get involved within a batterers program like Antonio and realize that, you know, alcoholism is, you know, making their lives a little unmanageable and destroying the lives of people around them. So like we are offering those substance abuse services here in Massachusetts, and along with those substance abuse services in Massachusetts comes some trauma treatment, so some co-occurring treatment that, you know, our guests and clients get that can kind of get to the root and to the cause to kind of, you know, change the thoughts, the actions follow type of situation.
Yeah, and your mom's story is horrific. I mean, there are no words for that, and losing your mom in such a tragic way. And I can't imagine her best friend walking in. Thankfully, her best friend cared enough to go looking for her. And she sounds amazing. She worked in the healthcare field as well. So what advice would you give to women that are taking the abuse or going through this abuse? Because a lot of abuse does end up in death. And you're one of the few people that can probably come and talk about it, you know? So what advice would you give looking back, you know, other than the neighbors calling for help, but for family that are aware of it, what would you say to them?
So for me, what I would tell somebody is that, you know, we don't speak up and we don't ask for help because we don't think anybody's going to understand. At least for me with my heroin addiction, I didn't think anybody was going to understand, identify, or could relate. But there are so many people out there that do understand, that have gone through what they're going through, that have experience, not advice, but experience that they can share with somebody that can, you know, potentially stop a murder or, you know, the worst of the worst from happening. So like breaking the silence and not being afraid to understand that people do go through this too, that they're not alone, that there is real life experience that can help them get through, and to the resources that they're going to need to get out would be my advice.
Okay. And Antonia and Lovern, you can chip in as well. What advice would you give? The three of you have such diverse journeys in this.
Yeah, I'd have to
because
concur
my
with-
phone is because
Go
my
ahead,
phone is
Antonio.
dying. I like to go, Lovern, and my light's about to go out. The advice I would give is I want to give advice to men, because women are not walking around beating themselves up or walking into walls or falling in showers or whatever. That's not happening. It's the men that are chasing, that are drinking, that are doing this, that are doing that and a third, and physically abusing these women and killing them. All right. So my advice to men right now is, if you have a friend, a son, a brother, a father, an uncle, you name them, when the language that he uses to describe his relationship, to describe his daughter, to describe his girlfriend, to describe his wife, if you don't check him, it's your fault too. You're responsible for that. Because when you don't say nothing to him, that's like, hey, I'm good. No one is checking me on my stuff. Yeah, man, she didn't cook this rice the right way. I smacked the shit out of her. Excuse my language. And you don't say nothing?
You're condoning
you
it.
are part of the problem.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about this, fellas. Let's step our game up. My phone's dying. I gotta go. I love you all. Thanks for the opportunity, Dawn, Lovern, Rob. Let's talk later on. All
Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Peace.
Yes. Love you, Antonio.
Good luck with the lights. And
I think this is a good segue, if I can, Dawn. There is a PSA that I directed around what's called the White Ribbon Campaign that asks more men to speak out against the issue. Antonio, I'm going to share that. Antonio knows what I'm talking about. If it's okay, do you mind? It's 1 minute. Do you mind if I share my screen for that? I think this is a good segue to that. I think you need to give me access. So if you want to make me host for just a second, I will share my screen.
No, you asking me?
If you go up to the top where it says mute, if you are able to go to those 3 dots, and I think you can make me host up there on my picture. If you click the 3 dots, I think you can make me host. Yeah? Oh, perfect. All right. Here we go. Because I think this is a good segue to that.
No volume.
Oh no.
But we can always share it in the chat. All right, so we'll share that in the chat.
Yeah, essentially it's men from all social classes, from all walks of life, literally saying, and you saw some of the wording, not to condone violence against women. Like, men have a responsibility on this issue to take charge when they hear someone, like Antonio said, sitting up, if you're at the barbershop and he's coming outside his neck and he's talking about how he's going to beat his wife and he's going to take his wife to Haiti to beat her, or Trinidad, or wherever. What are you doing when you hear that? If you say nothing, you are complicit in this narrative that says it's okay to talk to women like that, or deal with women like that, or treat women the way that they do. And as Rob said, I mean, if you hear something, you say something. I do not condone folks getting physically involved, because like with the Price murder that just happened the other day, he physically got involved to break up a domestic dispute. Unfortunately, it cost him his life. You don't know what that person has, if they have a knife on them. You don't know if they have a gun. You don't know what they're going to do to you. And then what happens? The victim goes home with them, and they're still going to get the brunt of the abuse, because they're going to get blamed for what happened. You brought attention to me. You made people come at me. You're the cause of this. And then what? But always what you can do is get yourself safe and call the police every single time. Because then they'll know, at least they'll have a report on the books that all is not well at 112 Summer Street. Okay? She's probably never going to pick up the phone and call out of fear. She probably doesn't have any avenue, and she's scared out of her mind. But you have a responsibility and the ability to do so anonymously if you don't want your name involved. You don't want to be looked upon as a troublemaker. Always, forever, and always call the police. Even if you're driving by, you're in the grocery store, something's happened in the parking lot, get as much details as you can. They're driving a red pickup truck. She has on a white top. Any identifying details, license plate, whatever you can get, call the police every time.
One of the things, and I know Lovern, I promised to get back to you
No worries.
on this is, no, I'm getting back to you now, is I want to go back to your childhood, because you touched on it a little bit about your dad and your mom, and that he beat her with a machete. And I don't want to skip through that, because I want to speak to the parents, and especially the fathers that are the primary abuser in the house, how it's impacting children. So I want you to take us back to that time frame when you were watching, you and your siblings were watching your mom being beaten. And I know at some point you all found the strength and courage to say no more, but tell us what that was like. I mean, I can't imagine beating her with a machete, and a lot of people can't.
Yeah.
Wasn't she cut, bruised?
She would suffer cuts from the attacks. And so again, it didn't just happen just within our house. Obviously, so a lot of the times if he did beat her, it would be in, so we had sort of a 3-room situation happening that consisted of our house. And at one point, my youngest brother, it was really just, it was 4 of us at one point. My 2 older siblings were 7 years apart, and then my brother was about 2 years apart from me, just like my older siblings were 2 years apart. And so we would be in a 1-bedroom. My mom and dad slept on 1 bed, and my siblings, 2 on top of a bunk bed and 2 below. And when Antonio was describing the metal post frame that he sort of would get trapped under, that brought me back to that bed, because that's what the popular bed was back then. And so my mom would be cornered into the bottom bunk of the bed where we slept, where she would crouch and, hide, sort of protect her head, try to protect anywhere that the blows were coming, because he would stand from sort of a distance, the entryway to the kitchen. The bedroom was in between the kitchen and the living room. And so he would stand sort of the entryway to the kitchen and sort of, right, these beer bottles that it was broke, that he would break, then throw them at her body. I remember one particular attack that he made myself and my brother, who was 2 years younger than me, sit and watch next to him. I remember my mother whimpering with her crouched on, in the corner of the bed. And she's crying, but she can't cry loud because that would further irritate him. And so he has this machete and he's slapping her body with it, but it's sharp. So it's they would call it plan-assing back in the Caribbean, but it was him slapping the machete against her body very hard, to the point where she would suffer cuts from it. And I remember sitting there and saying to myself, this is completely wrong, but I am 7, 8 at the time. You can't do anything. You're crying profusely, quietly like your mother, because you don't want to upset him. You can't do anything. You're helpless. I feel helpless. The times when he beat her in front of our house, at the side of our house, I'm watching other men that he would rap with on the block every other day, and they're coming and they're watching these attacks and very sort of whimpering, like, you should stop. And they'd call his name, you should stop, but not like at that point. I want them to, obviously I don't understand like I do now. You don't want to physically intervene, but I'm like, why don't they just jump on him and pull him off her? And so this love-hate relationship with my neighbors in those moments, because it's like, you're physically strong enough to handle this guy. We're not, right? I'm probably 90 pounds soaking wet. Right. And there's no way I could take my father on top of the fear that we fear him. We all walked on eggshells. We all knew when he pulled up to the house that when he walked in, we didn't know what the attitude was going to be. And so to see him do this to my mom, it was just like, my God. And so my child's play, a lot of the time, would be acting out how I would take on my father. I would gather kids around in the neighborhood and we would play judge and jury. Blair Underwood was a popular thing he was popular back in the day from LA Law. And I admired that show. And I wanted to be Blair Underwood. I wanted to be Claire Huxtable. I wanted to be somebody that would grow up and prosecute my father. Even though I loved him, even though I respected the fact that he was well-read, that he was articulate, that he was educated. He was the first in the family to go to a college trade school. My mother barely had an elementary school education. So even if cops did show up, very rare do I remember a cop ever ending up in front of our door. Back then, in the 80s, domestic violence wasn't even a coined term in the third world country, for us at least. And the police would show up and say, it's a husband and wife thing. Or my father could easily talk his way out of what was happening, make it look like my mother was crazy. Well, and that was it. Well, you guys patch things up and make sure we don't get a call again. And that's it. So it's like nobody to turn to, nobody to understand and sort of relay this back, because what I didn't quite grasp is the idea that the neighbors, the guys, they were doing the same thing in their households to their wives. So who are they to come talk to him or tell him to stop when they're doing the same thing? So it was completely, Antonia talks about wetting the bed. I do not generally talk about this, but yes, I was a bedwetter for a very long time. That trauma played itself out. I was a grown woman. When I moved to the States in 1993 to go to high school, now I at least had my own bed. I wasn't sharing a bed with my younger brother, right? Where I could easily sort of cover it up, right? I couldn't let my grandparents know that I'm wetting my bed at 15, 16, 17 years old, Dawn, right? And this is trauma after nightmares that I would have about my mom being cornered somewhere in the house and him slicing her. These were my nightmares, him slicing her slowly and her crying, and I'm yelling to stop, but no voice, no sound is coming out in these nightmares. Helpless is what that was resorted to. Helpless. That's what we and all my siblings felt. I'll speak to my brother's case, and this is something that he shares openly. That he was very aggressive at very early on in secondary school. He was beating up people, beating up kids, beating up teachers. He got expelled twice. Ended up in a gang because aggression is what he was taught. Him and my older sister got the brunt of the child abuse, right? So he was 2x4 pieces of wood that he would beat them with, iron cords, switches from the tree, kicks in the head. I mean, my sister, my God, he bursted her blouse out front, beating her for some stupid thing, where she finally then decided she ran away and she never came back, right? At 7, I think she was 17, 18, and she never came back. My brother, he couldn't see eye to eye with my father. He then, even earlier on, and when I came back and I said, we're all older and we're not standing for it, he from a very early age was like standing up to my father whenever he was around. He married aggression with aggression because that's what we were taught, right? And so 5 of us, we all got affected by this issue in different ways. And I am not going to speak for them, but I can tell you that I became a victim. Okay? 2 were abusive to their partners, brothers. 1 doesn't. And my sister's not having any of it. She's that try it. She's that try it with me person, right? So all of us received this message in different ways.
And handled it
and handle it differently. And so you just never know. Antonio talks about it quite on. There were sometimes that we weren't privy to the abuse because it was in the other room and he closed the door, right? Because he wanted to have it, out, whatever, for whatever reason. But we could visually imagine what the beating was looking like.
Let me ask you this, Lovern. So as a kid, there's not, like you said, not much you can do in running away. When you think of a kid running away, what are you running to, right? Because then you're running to the streets, the unknown, to be even more abused, right? So you stay as a kid because where are you going to go? Now, looking back, if you could change that situation, or what advice would you give to your mom now as an adult looking back?
When you run, stay gone. There were times that she was absolutely able to escape that particular attack. And that meant sometimes running away barefooted. Sometimes it meant because there was a certain period that it was just myself and my brother that's 2 years younger than me. We were there for a time just as kids in the house until my youngest brother came, because my oldest brother moved out next door, and my sister, she ran away. But in those times, sometimes she would take us and run with us in the middle of the night. And we would run to the abandoned house that my grandparents lived in when they lived in Trinidad before they migrated to the States. There was no lights, there was no running water. And the times that we were there with her, it's because she had to borrow a cup of sugar, borrow, a pack of Kool-Aid or something, or some limes to make some lime juice. I remember there was one time that we ran away and she didn't have anything to feed us. And she had like maybe I don't know how many dollars to buy a box of cornflakes, right? Kellogg's cornflakes. And all she could get from the neighbor, they didn't have any milk. They had like a pack of Kool-Aid and some sugar. She mixed that Kool-Aid and poured it over the cereal, and that was our dinner. And I'm going to tell you, Dawn, those were some of the happiest times for us as kids because we weren't walking on eggshells. We knew that she was safe from a particular attack. And that's something I think that my mother didn't understand was gold for us. What was in her mind was making sure that her kids were fed, and surviving on cornflakes and Kool-Aid wasn't going to cut it. He was the one that could help us with homework because he was educated. He was the one that was going to provide the clothes on our backs to go to school and books. He was the right. And so those were the things that in her mind that she was doing a better service to us to stay or come back every single time. Wait till he cooled down and show up again when she knew that, you know, things had sort of sort of dwindled down. But she didn't understand, and this is something that I explained to her when I got older, and she completely knows now, is that leaving would have been the best thing. Leaving, and no matter what the circumstance.
Yeah.
I think for her, she just had the long run and the long-term picture. And this is what a lot of victims run into when they get to that point, and there are kids involved. Long-term, yeah, I can come sleep on your couch tonight, but what does that mean for me and the kids in a month? What does that mean in a year? Right? Long term, they're thinking, they think they're putting their children first, not understanding that there are resources available, that if you end up in a shelter, your kids are going to receive counseling. You are going to get help to get back on the straight and narrow in terms of getting, resume help and, job coaching, legal help to help. They don't know that these services exist through domestic violence agencies that are out there. And so that's part of what we do today, is just creating awareness around that and making sure that people understand that that they know that the unknown is scary, but it does exist and there is help beyond what you're going through.
So we're going to have a part 2. The viewers are already saying that. So we're going to wrap up tonight's conversation. Rob, what would you like to say with everything you've heard and gone through tonight? What advice would you give, whether it's to men, children, women?
My advice is that I didn't know what I didn't know. And until I knew it was a new opinion was formed, and to speak up if you're struggling. There are other people that have gone through it, have gotten through it, and know how to get out of it, that can help, follow their example. And for the ones that have gotten out of it, lead by example.
Thank you. And I can't thank you enough. You have had a journey beyond anything that I've heard. I mean, between your own personal struggles with drugs, heroin, losing your mom in such a way, and now, finding the strength to go through the most difficult times, and honoring your mom is what I get from what you're doing now, and honoring your daughter, and her memory will live on as well, because you're also blessed with so much strength to give back. And sometimes we don't know why we've been handed such a rough, hard, difficult journey. But then sometimes through what we're doing to make impact and change around the world, hopefully you see a light in there. But certainly you are strength. And I thank you for sharing your journey tonight with us.
Thank you.
And so do our viewers. And Lovern, you're doing such amazing work. Thank you for sharing your journey. Any parting words as well? I know you touched slightly on the court systems and what you went through. So if you could mention that in your summary as well, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, leaving is one of the very hardest things that, is for a survivor. Please understand that this isn't a black and white issue, that it's very complex, and it's not as easy as picking up and leaving. When survivors sort of do get to that point, there's so many hoops unfortunately, they bear the burden of proof, right? To get themselves safe, and it shouldn't be that way. But alas, this is what it is. So you get to that point. I urge you, if you're thinking about leaving, please find out, and even if you're not affected by this issue and you know someone that may be, find out what the local domestic violence agency is in your area, so that at least you can point that person in that direction. And for you, you can then get connected with an advocate that can help you safety plan. So really help you to exit this relationship safely. So helping you change up your routines, getting important documents together, getting legal help that you may or may not need, counseling, all of that. So just getting connected with an advocate that can help you, sort of navigate what leaving looks like in a safe manner is my biggest advice. And again, you help with a restraining order that I did not have help with, which was a traumatizing process in itself. You need a victim witness advocate with you to sort of hold your hand and let you know what the sort of the terms are, what you can say in front of the judge, what you can't say, sort of help you walk through the process without feeling like you're being put through a fire, which it still ends up being, but at least they're there with you holding your hand. So pick up the phone. If you're in the United States, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It is 1-800-799-SAFE. They have enabled the chat feature where you can text them as well to start a chat and find out what the agency is in your area. Or you can call us if you're in the Massachusetts area at 888-556-9876. You can also text and chat with us. And then if you're in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, I spoke specifically, the hotline is 800-SAVE, 800-SAVE. I don't know what they are for the other islands, and I wish I could have just a listing of all the hotlines for all the Caribbean. So maybe Dawn, that's something that maybe you can post on your website. I can try to gather and sort of have you post. But there are hotlines. I think that's the biggest thing is that every country has a hotline that you can call to find out what the resources are in your area. So Google it if you have to at this point, and find out where you can get help, because help does exist and it's just waiting. It's waiting for you.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned safety, because I read somewhere where it said 70% of murders happen after the person leaves. So it's very important that people...
Most dangerous time.
Yeah, because then they're losing their control and their power over you. So
absolutely,
thank you for that. Thank you both. Thank the viewers for tuning in. I promise you we'll go back and answer all your comments tonight. Share this episode because you're impacting lives, and we'll share your link as well. Thank you both for joining us on the Caribbean Edge. We so appreciate you.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.